Hemophilia, what most of the world knows as the royal disease. And although it does affect everyday people, it is most famous for being the illness that plagued the descendants of Victoria, Queen of England. Now, what do Queen Victoria and the Russian Revolution have in common? Before I answer that, I will provide you with an amount of information that will allow you to piece together the colossal effect that hemophilia has had on the world. Today, I will introduce you to the granddaughter of King George III, who is also known as the crazy guy who became the reason that the original 13 colonies sought to gain independence from Great Britain. Her name was Princess Victoria of Kent and Strathearn. And upon her uncle, William IV's death in 1837, she inherited the British throne. In 1840, she married her first cousin. I know, ew, right? Her first cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, and they went on to produce 9 children. Although this was a love match, the two were completely unaware of the consequences that their union would have on their family for generations to come. Now, since my early childhood, I have always had a keenness for acquiring knowledge about the subject, and have grown increasingly intrigued by historical events related to royalty. After many years of extensive research, I have decided to take a piece of that information and share it with you today. I will go into the detail of the relatives of Victoria and Albert, who suffered the tragic fate of being either a carrier, who were the women, or a receiver, the men, of the hemophilic gene. More importantly, I will explain how it aided the governmental downfall of Russia in the 1910s and Spain in the 1930s. Now, what is hemophilia exactly, and why is this thing so terrible? Well, we all have DNA, which is also known as deoxyribonucleic acid. It's basically just your genetic makeup. And the little building blocks that create that DNA are called nucleotides. Those little building blocks, whenever there is a change or a genetic mutation that occurs involving the nucleotides that help to create blood clotting, it affects the nucleotides so that whenever your body does RNA splicing, which is just your body's way of getting everything organized to produce protein, it is unable to use those nucleotides to produce the protein that makes blood clot. And after a nasty fall, where a normal person would usually have just a bruise, if you have hemophilia, you will continue to bleed and bleed and bleed until that part of your body is completely swollen. A lot of that times, that blood will spread throughout your body, more commonly to your joints. It is a very slow and painful process, and very deadly. But if you're lucky enough to survive something like that, it will still take many months to recover. It's really horrible, really. Now, the first person of royal blood who inherited this hemophilia was Victoria and Albert's 8th child, Prince Leopold. Now, during his childhood, after a nasty fall, he suffered a life-threatening period where everyone thought he was going to die. It was very mysterious, pretty much came out of nowhere, and after the physicians examined him, they were able to conclude what it was, and that it was passed down the family. Now, Queen Victoria, being a person in such a high position of power with many children to marry off, and with no familiarity of this so-called hemophilia affecting her family before, she sort of passed it off as, no, it's just a rare occurrence, you know, it's just a tragic, random thing, it's no big deal. That decision will haunt the royal family forever. Now, although Leo died when he was 31, between that, he was around long enough to have children. his eldest child, Princess Alice, was a carrier of hemophilia. Here is Princess Alice, and she had a son, Rupert. Poor Rupert. He had hemophilia. And when he got into a car crash, whereas he had very minor injuries, he died. The doctor said that if he had not had hemophilia, he probably would have survived. That is the kind of intense effect that this can have on the human body. Now, if that's not depressing enough, just wait, because I do have more for you. Victoria had two lovely daughters, Princess Alice, her third child, Princess Beatrice, her ninth, very last child. They were both carriers, who both had sons who died of hemophilia, and, wait for it, grandchildren who also had hemophilia who happened to be occupying two of the most unsteady houses of Europe. Princess Alice had a daughter named Alex of Hesse, who became Alexandra Feodorovna, Empress of all Russia. She married her soulmate, Tsar Nicholas II. And after having 4 girls in a row in such a male-dominated nation, she finally had her boy, Tsarevich Alexei. Poor Alexei, he was also a hemophilic. So here we have Olga, Tatiana, Marie, Anastasia, who you might know from the movie Anastasia, and Alexei. Victoria's last child, Princess Beatrice, had a daughter named Victoria, who married King Alfonso the 13th of Spain. Many people already knew the consequences of hemophilia by then, because that was many years had passed. By the time they kind of knew what was happening in their family. When his advisors told him, he said, "Oh, you know, nobody that beautiful could possibly pass down such an ugly disease, because who needs logic?" So he decided to marry her anyways. Much to their dismay, 2 of their children, little Alfonso and Gonzalo, were hemophilic. The inevitable yet temporary Spanish Revolution of 1931 had happened already, and not even a decade after that passed before these 2 were both killed by the hemophilia. They both had minor incidents that had produced minor injuries that they probably would not have suffered from if they were not hemophilic. Now back to the Russians. Here's Tsarevich Alexei, who I already informed you has hemophilia. Now, by the time Alexandra came to Russia, Russia had already had many German brides enter into the royal family and marry and produce, many Romanovs, strong sons. But none was so hated as Alexandra. She was antisocial, cold, and reserved. Nobody liked her. And by 1904, when she was pregnant with Alexei, her reputation was already hanging on a thread. To be honest, a lot of people were talking about making Nicholas divorce her and marry someone else, but he wouldn't do that. He loved her. So, finally, when she had her boy, she had the chance to kind of redeem herself. Everything was great until 6 weeks after his birth, when it was discovered Alexei had hemophilia. And he had been one of those children that, because of having such a condition, having to be carefully watched all the time, being told no a lot, that he grew into this very rambunctious child. So that led to one very miserable empress who was so guilty because she knew that it was passed down from her. And she had mother's guilt of the worst kind. I mean, one of the worst kinds. So, The one man that was able to help, somehow, was this guy, Grigory Rasputin. Kind of creepy, right? He was corrupt, he meddled in politics, and pretty much everyone hated him. But Alexandra said, no, he's a holy man. God sent him to me. He's able to cure my son. And that was just enough to push Russia right to the edge of a revolution. And they crossed that line after his death, and sadly, many Romanovs were killed. And I do have a theory. There is much evidence that supports the fact that obviously Spain, by that time, they had their little revolution. It was temporary. It's not even a revolution. But that was completely inevitable. However, I do believe that as blindly loyal to their czars as Russians are, if Alexei had not had hemophilia, maybe it decreased the likeliness of there ever being a revolution. So, would Victoria and Albert ever have married if they knew the consequences of their union? Well, we can't really say. It is safe to say that hemophilia is one of the most terrifying and unpredictable diseases there are, especially when it casts its shadow on powerful world leaders and the future of governments. Will hemophilia introduce itself into the British royal family? Who's to say? However, if it does, we know where it came from. The current monarch, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and her husband, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, are third cousins through Queen Victoria. And so, if this hemophilia does come around again, we know where it comes from. Is there a chance of it happening anytime soon? We will just have to wait and see.